Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of the Chamber's Business Perspective. I am your host, Celine Cleland Gomez. This evening we talk about the issues surrounding the Chalillo Dam and precisely what are or is the value of Chalillo. And we do so with Mr. Lin Young, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Belize Electricity Limited, and Mr. Mick Fleming, who is the owner of Cha Creek Cottages and has been living by the Macau River for 32 years or so, yeah?
32 years.
Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for being here tonight. Before we get into the actual discussion, though, there are a few people I need to thank, as per normal. I'd like to thank Habet and Habet, Mikado, and Pandora's for the lovely set, and of course Angela's Press for the chairs. We also invite you to send your feedback to us. We have an email address at businessperspective@belize.org. So, Chalillo, it's been something that we've been discussing, I think, for the last 4 years or so.
It came online in 2006.
It's
2005.
yeah, it was commissioned in November of 2005 is
right,
my
yeah.
information.
2006
And ever
was the
since
first,
then,
yeah.
in fact, before then, it was creating quite a, it was wreaking havoc, and now
Yeah.
it seems to be in the forefront of the discussion, the public discussion once again. So just for some context, Mr. Young, we'll start with you. Can you give us some background? Why we needed to go that route? What were the issues related to it? What has been its contribution, those types of things?
Yeah, sure. First of all, let me say that I am with BEL, right? And the Chalillo is under a separate company.
I understand.
Even though it's owned by the same parent company as BEL. I think it might have been when I first joined BEL in the 80s, when we were looking, I think we had the first oil price shocks that hit the country. And we had to increase electricity rates, and there were demonstrations and all sorts of stuff.
Really?
Nothing changed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just a young engineer at the time, taking it all in. But I think about that time the company decided that, and the government, because the government owned the company at that time, decided that we need to do something to insulate the country against the oil, the problems with the oil and the costs, just going out through the roof. So we did a study. And it was a least cost generation study, looking at different alternatives. We looked at solar power, wind power,
When did this happen?
hydroelectricity. This was I think in the 90s we completed that study.
All right.
Right. There's been a lot of studies on the whole thing. Even before I joined BEB back then, there were studies about the hydro potential of the Macau River, and it was generally agreed that the Macau River was the only river that could sustain any serious hydro development in the country, because the catchment area is the biggest catchment area in the country. Right? The other rivers along the coast, they don't have big catchment areas, and so you wouldn't get as much power out of them.
Okay.
So, but of course, the first thing was to figure out, well, which way the country should go to reduce its dependence on oil. The two options that really jumped out at us was the development of the Macau River and buying power from CFE.
Okay.
At that time, we were importing a diesel from Mexico, and the numbers showed that it was much cheaper to import the electricity than to import the diesel and turn it into electricity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but of course, the problem with that, of course, is when you're importing the diesel, if you have a problem with the supply, you can get the diesel from elsewhere. If you're importing electricity through a transmission line, when they don't have electricity, you have a problem.
Exactly,
as
we know.
Yeah, as we know, right. Yeah, but nonetheless, at that time, electricity from Mexico was like 3 cents US per kilowatt hour. And in Belize, we were selling electricity for about 44, the same price that we are selling now, back then in the early 80s, right? So by importing more electricity from Mexico, we figured that would help us to reduce the cost of electricity and increase the reliability. What happened at that time, we had isolated diesel plants. Each town had its own diesel plant, And you have to have double the capacity that the town needed just so that when one generator goes down, you can still supply the power. And it was expensive because we were generating on diesel. So the rate was about 44 cents per kilowatt hour back then.
Okay.
So the first thing we realized is that to really take advantage of the power from Mexico, we had to interconnect all the load centers.
Yes.
So that we started after we connected Corozal to CFE, then we started the Part2 project to build the transmission line from Mexico to Belize City. And we looked at the development of the hydro. Back then, the government was planning to do it. And it's interesting that...
So that's an interesting point. What you're saying is that the government, way back in the 1980s, had decided that this was to be the way to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the study started under one political party and continued under another, under the other political party.
Okay.
And they both supported it fully. And in fact, were pushing us to do it. And it was the engineers in BL that said, no, we can't do this without complete set of environmental studies. So we actually had to kind of hold back the government, telling them that you cannot do a hydro project of this nature without investing seriously in the environmental studies. So the first set of environmental studies was actually undertaken by the government of Belize.
Okay.
And they paid for the first environmental studies on the river. Coming out of that, the government, for whatever reasons, decided that they wanted to outsource it. In that time, what they call the booth arrangements were fashionable. Build, own, operate, and transfer. And the cost of the project was working out, the estimate was around $30 million US. That was for the Marion project.
Okay.
And in fact, by the time they got around to it, it escalated much more. I think it ended up costing almost $60 million. But when the first estimate was that it was going to be $30 million. But we have to remember, though, that when we did the studies, it took almost 10 or 15 years before we got to building the plant.
Okay.
And by then, there was a lot of escalation and stuff like that. So when they went out to bids, the lowest bid was by a Chinese company. And so the idea was that you could build one big dam to get the 60 megawatts, but the environmental impact would have been, we thought was going to be really horrendous.
Sure. Okay.
So they decided, and besides which, the 60 megawatts would have been way more power than the country needed at the time. I think our peak load then might have been 30-something megawatts, right? So the idea was to build it in stages to match the growth in the demand, and also to reduce the environmental impact of the projects. So the first project that was done was Maleon. That was a 25 megawatt plant, and it turns out, and one of the issues we had as engineers was that we felt there wasn't sufficient studies on the river. It was pretty obvious to us that the quantity of water was there, but we weren't comfortable that we had enough knowledge of the flows, the river flows, and the river is very flashy. And I think we only had like maybe 5 or 6 years of data at the time.
Okay.
And to really understand the river, you need much more data than that to get the cycles, because now you know there's the El Nino cycle and La Nina cycle. So you can catch 5 years when you have high water flows. When you get another 5 years, that's very low water flows.
But it was designed, if I understand it, just to deal with whatever flows were coming. They call it the run of the river type of.
It was a run of river, yes.
So whatever flow is coming down, your catchment area is relatively small, 32 acres or something.
Yes.
So you're constantly moving the water,
That's right.
through the tunnel. So
it was supposed to be. It was a run of river, but when it was done. At the time, it was supposed to be done, and then the upstream storage was supposed to be done like shortly after. And it was supposed to be done at Rubber Camp originally. That was the intention. And the government did a contract with Dominion Energy to build Maleon, and the government would build the upstream storage, which is what we call Chalillo now, but it would have been Rubber Camp back then. So the government was actually on hook to do that. As it turns out, Maleon did not perform the way they had expected.
The way who expected, the government or
the developers? Because at that point in time we were not involved. Beacle was owned by Dominion Energy, an American company, and the contract, we actually did not even negotiate a contract. It was one of those cases where, back in those days, the government does things and it gives us and say, okay guys, this is what you're supposed to sign up to.
Yeah.
Right? So we got it. We looked at it as, and we didn't think that it was going to produce 120 gigawatt hours, because we were concerned about the wildlife flows. I think now that we look back, we understand better. I think Dominion Energy had similar concerns why they made it a take-or-pay arrangement. Because they were investing significant sums of money and they're on hook to their banks or whatever. And they want to make sure that they get their cash flows, right?